Ooh, that's loud. Okay. All right. So thank you all for being here. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Turtle Island Reborn speaker series and Convergence. Tonight is kind of the opening, and I must confess, as is quite obvious, I think, that this it's kind of coming in like a freight train, and this vision, however, has been something that's been alive for quite some time. So I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about that. And tonight, the theme is really, it's about restoring sacred culture across the Americas. But before I even go into that, I want to just give a little bit of an overview of what's going to be happening over the course of this coming month. So tonight is an introduction to kind of the larger vision, the theme of what we're going to be exploring. And then, and we're going to have some conversation as a community that I'm really excited about. And then beginning July 17th through August 6th, I'm going to be interviewing some of the individuals who have most deeply inspired me. And in these conversations, creating a bridge between some of the consciousness communities of astrologers, some of the really incredible astrologers in my larger community and our larger communities, and also individuals who are elders in the ecological, the really very potent and timely fields of bioregionalism, of those individuals who are eco-village founders, people who have really been doing the work of trying to create a new culture for many, many years, and you have a lot of wisdom to share for those of us who are just now kind of beginning to catch up. So it's going to kind of be a weaving or a bridge between people who are more focused on spirituality and more of the ecological concerns or earth care. So that's going to be happening. I'm really excited, and also some really incredible Indigenous leaders, healers are going to be part of those conversations. And then that all leads us to August 7th, where we're going to have a full live day event where we will have many councils. Now, this is going to be patterned. The Vision Council is patterned after events that they've been doing. A community of these eco-sapiens, as I'm referring to them. There is a community across Latin America who have been gathering these Vision Council gatherings since the early 90s. And it's the kind of event where people come together in councils that might be focused on ecology, they might be focused on youth, they might be focused on elders, they might be focused on spirituality, Indigenous perspectives. And then they have these, the event that I first went to, we created a living week-long eco-village right in the kind of the shadow of Machu Picchu in Peru, and 35 people, 700 people from 35 countries came, and we created a sacred culture for a week where we were all weaving and learning from one another and really connected to the land. That planted the seeds for what I'm sharing with you today, because many of the individuals who were creating that event and who created these events all across Mexico and South America from that time forward to the present, they have, they're still doing incredible work across the globe, and I'm going to be featuring them in the interview series. But we're going to do a little mini version of that for a day in August, and so I'm going to be inviting people who are participating now as well to participate in councils, perhaps to propose topics for different councils. And when I say councils, I mean there will be gatherings all across throughout the day that you can connect into to learn more and contribute to this question of how do we create a sacred culture? How do we, how is it that we here in the Americas can really weave together and create this new way of being that we're being called to at this time. So there's going to be that. And then my real dream is that August 8th, everyone who's engaged, who is up for this, will actually plan some form of an event in their own bioregion or in their own local community that we can share together. So this is kind of emerging as we go along. It will shift and it will change as it becomes more alive and as more of you weave into it. But that's where it is right now. And then all of this is actually also building to to bring in more support for Sisters North and South, which is a program that I've been dreaming into for the last couple of years that is an allyship program for Indigenous female leaders across the Americas. So that's the kind of bigger frame. And I'm so happy to see all of you arriving. I want to make sure that I'm actually able to see. I'm going to stop this share just for a moment. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm actually going to, I'm going to ask Tracy, can I make you a co-host? Because I'm realizing, I did not realize that I had this issue where, yeah, Tracy, are you there? Can I make you, and the purpose for that is so that you can continue to invite people in as I'm speaking, because I can't actually see that function while I'm on my slideshow. But if you're co-host, you can do that. So if you could just keep an eye, thank you so much, and keep letting people in, that would be awesome. Okay. All right, perfect, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna once again share the screen. All right, so amazing. All right, so just to share a bit about what I mean when I refer to sacred culture, I think many of us can kind of feel or sense what that is. We've all had experiences where we have been in community in one way, shape, or form, where we maybe it's at a festival, maybe it's I think for many of us it is in that kind of gathering. Maybe for those of us who have attended rainbow gatherings or festivals that are focused on a theme, like maybe there are actually bioregional gatherings or music themed festivals or other festivals where we come together and we're actually connecting in a way that feels very alive, that feels like it tunes us back into something really primal and really ancient. For what my experience has been is that we live in a time here in the US where there's a big gap, there's a vacuum, and our modern culture is so rich in so many ways, and yet there's been this disconnect from the natural world. And I think many of us are seeing that that's actually re-enlivening now. There's a reconnect to our bodies, there's a reconnect to the earth, there's a reconnect to a lot of the original wisdom of co-regulating with other humans. So there's a lot that's needing to remember how to be a true human again. That's one way to look at it, that we've kind of forgotten. So when I talk about Turtle Island, what I'm referring to specifically is, you can see this image. Cody Two Bears is he's a Sioux individual who is very active during Standing Rock. He's a solar activist, but I really loved his version of Turtle Island because I think it really shows you where that original image or idea came from. So you can see here's the turtle. It's actually a snapping turtle. You can see how it's Canada, North America, the US, Mexico, even parts of Central America. It's pretty great the way that actually shows up. And so Turtle Island is the way that many Indigenous activists, thinkers, especially in the US and in Canada and across the Americas, they refer to North America in that way. Some individuals also refer to all of the Americas, North and South America, as Turtle Island. And there's also a reference, Abya Yala, that is sometimes used to refer to South America and North America and Central America. And this image you'll see right here is really beautiful because it references the prophecies, the indigenous prophecies of the eagle and the condor that many of you will know about. That this is one of many indigenous prophecies that speaks to the time that we live in right now as this major age change, where in the case of these prophecies, it said that the people of the North, which includes North America, including Canada and Mexico, the Eagle people would connect once again with the people of the Condor in South America, and that merging of the people in the South who are more heart-centered with the people of the North who are more mind-oriented would bring about a kind of a renaissance of culture. since that original prophecy, there's also been, in a sense, this, evolving even of that story, and to include the Quetzal, because the Quetzal bird is kind of the bird that's very much associated with Central America. So there's this weaving, there's a rich weaving for those who, for Indigenous communities and those who have been really woven into those perspectives, where we understand that there's something really vital about seeing these beautiful continents connected and understanding we live in a time where the again, the weaving of the worldview of the peoples of these places is very vital, and the remembrance of what I would say, obviously a large premise of what my work is that it's essential for us in this time of massive culture change and a turning of an age. That's one way you can talk about it, this massive, this time where we are hospicing one age and we're midwifing a new age, that I think many of us are recognizing that one of the core elements, or one of the ways that we can emerge or give birth to a new mythology or a new story about who we are and how we move forward, is to really listen to the voices of the land itself and of the Indigenous peoples who remain across the globe. And specifically today, I'm talking about those voices from the individuals in North America and really across the Americas. So this is, I will say that there are some Indigenous people who would actually refer to the entire globe as Turtle Island. The reason I like to speak to this Turtle Island, however, is because literally I've had a lot of visions and a lot of literal dreams as I've been tuning into this big age change that we're in the midst of, that have shown me that this is a very vivid way for us to consider a reflowering or a regeneration of this part of the world. And I want to make a case today for the idea that we here in the Americas, and especially in the US, are poised to affect massive change across the globe, that we are really in the heart of where the change needs to happen. We're in the crosshairs. And so it's vital for us to consider other perspectives, other ways of living life. And one of the ways to do that is to, number one, to remember that Indigenous people are still here. I was just talking to somebody even yesterday where she was just saying, I didn't even know that Native people are there still Iroquois, or there's still Haudenosaunee people. And she's from New York. And that's very common, that many people don't realize Native people, Indigenous people are still here in the Americas and across the globe. And that there has been a great reweaving, that over the last 20, 30 years, Native groups have come together and they've created very powerful, strong allyship among themselves. And Standing Rock was one of the instances where that was very evident for anyone who followed it. According to some sources, as many as 600 different tribes were represented in Standing Rock in 2016, who came together to fight that pipeline. And one of the gifts of what happened at Standing Rock is that it awoke many people to the reality that, especially here in the US, that there are still Native people here. And they still have quite a bit that they can teach us about what all of our original ancestors knew. So my premise, and the premise of many astrologers, many thinkers who are looking at this bigger map of where we're at right now, is that from about 2016 to 2025, this is the heart of massive culture change. So there's a larger window that I often look at as an astrologer from the tradition that I come from, which is that we're in a larger 72-year window of massive culture change, and that started in late 1966, and the closing of that window occurs in about 2030. So we're in the window that's much larger, where we can imagine the culture change of the 60s, and then there's this period of time where in this massive change. But I would say that the heart of that shift and change is really from 2016 to 2025 here in the Americas, and especially the US. And so the reason I would make that case is because of the eclipse paths that we're really experiencing now. And I'm going to show images of that here in a minute. Many of you will know about this. Also that the Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee, that they, I see them as kind of a model for the type of healthy, vibrant, whole community that has naturally emerged from this land, from the Northeast and the Americas, and that they literally formed their great confederacy and a very strong, healthy community immediately after an eclipse, like some of the eclipses that are traversing our lands right now. Another reason I say that this is where we're at right now is a window of massive change is because of many astrological events that are very specifically activating the US. Many of you will know that as an astrologer, when I give someone a reading or a session, astrologers look at the birth chart of an individual. And so you're looking at the moment a person's born, you look at the map of the sky, the images, the symbology of that can tell you a lot about that person's life. And also there will be certain cycles that person goes through, certain activation points, certain times that are like a dark night of the soul, or a time of great upheaval and change, or a time of great possibility and opportunity. So we all go through larger cycles in our personal lives, and nations, it's well understood in the astrological community that nations are the same. They are a body in a sense. And so the US is going through massive culture changes right now. And I'm going to break that down in a minute. Also, we have the eagle and the condor prophecy I already mentioned. Also, this is really pretty fascinating. I'll talk a little bit about the Toltec long count calendar and how that also gives us a way of looking at this shifting of an era that we're in the midst of, and why that puts the focal point on these years between 2016 and 2025. And then last, I'll end with the Venus cycle that we're in right now. For many of you, you may love to see Venus in the morning sky. You may love to follow the Venus cycle. Many ancient peoples would have followed the cycles of Venus as really telling us, helping us understand the larger cycles of time, because she's the third brightest celestial object in the sky. And it's understood that when you understand her cycles, you can really understand what's happening from a much larger viewpoint. So here's an image of the eclipses that we have been going through, will be going through. So you can see there's the one in 2017 that I think many of you, especially those in the US, will remember. It's August 21st, 2017. It swept right through the heart of the US. There's going to be another one, an annular solar eclipse. That's where you have that ring of fire. Those are quite less common than these others, the total solar eclipses. But and that is going to be transecting. It's right here, also going through the heart of the US. And then in 2024, we have a third eclipse traveling through there. Now, there are a lot of instances for people who study eclipses where there are major changes in the in what happens in a particular region or nation based on when eclipses will make these kinds of activations, especially when you've got three like this. So that's a big deal. Then we have the annular solar eclipse that also, is occurring in the northern part of North America here. So this is a lot to happen in this small window of time, but again, it's felt very strong and very clear to me that this is part of why we're in, as we now know, as we can clearly feel, we're in the heart of this, you could say dark night of the soul, you could say renaissance, you could say death rebirth process, you could say we're in the chrysalis preparing to become a butterfly. But this is one of the ways to look at that and see that. And when I refer to the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois Confederacy and the way that they founded, they basically were 5 warring tribes leading up to the date of 1142. And they came together. If any of you have heard the stories of Hiawatha and the Great Peacemaker, and the less known third figure, Jigonsansi, who is the mother of the clan mother of nations. In the Iroquois Confederacy, in their stories, they talk about the history of when their 5 tribes came together. And they tell the story of how when these fighting tribes, before the Great Law of Peace was created and before the arrival of the Great Peacemaker, they were living in a very dark age, much as we could say we've been living through as well, with profound levels of violence, with incredible greed. It was a dark time. And so in their stories, they came together, they created a confederacy of previously very violent and hostile tribes into one unified body, in a sense, of 5 different unique nations. So they formed that government immediately after a eclipse had passed through their territories. You can see that this is the eclipse that passed through. And these regions here, Rochester in New York, these were kind of the heart of Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy territories. So, so that, some Indigenous scholars would indicate that also that they saw that as a really powerful, profound time to set in motion a new kind of order. So I personally have found that to be very inspiring in terms of taking note of what's happening astrologically in the bigger sweep of time, and seeing this as an opportunity for us to tune in and to actively choose to participate in these larger cycles. I was always taught that we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us, and that's why it's so useful to have this bigger overview of what's happening astrologically, so that we can dream into it, we can participate, we can co-create with it. So for those of you who aren't super familiar with astrology, I will just say everything that I've got listed here, basically this is a picture of the sky the moment that the US was founded. So just like a birth chart of a human being, this inner circle is the US birth chart, right? So all the symbols are the different planets. This tells a story. This is like the blueprint, the potential spiritual blueprint for how the US could express itself. These outer planets are kind of describing what's happening to that inner storyline, that inner blueprint. So what's activating it? You can see this is Pluto, this is Pluto. So Pluto has a very slow cycle. Many of you have heard of in an individual human's life, many of us have heard about the Saturn return. Saturn takes about 28 years to complete a cycle and to return to the point where it was when it began. So every human being, that's like when we turn about 28, 29, we're going through a Saturn cycle, a Saturn return. And it's a very Saturnian time where, we're often maturing in some way, in our career, in our relationships, these kinds of things. The US, human beings, we don't go through a Pluto return because it's a very slow cycle. It takes 248 years for Pluto to return to the point where it was, so at the beginning of any cycle. So Pluto has just returned to the original point. Today, actually, is the exact Pluto conjunction with Pluto on the US birth chart. This is one of several hits in early February. That was the first activation of the US birth chart. And so it's a longer cycle that's going to last through 2023. I'm going to talk about what that means in a moment. I will talk about what all these things mean, but I just want to say this is a very rare cycle. And understand it can feel like a dark night of the soul. It is ultimately, the intent of it is some of the deepest transformation we can possibly experience. So if I were to describe which of these cycles are most important, because I listed a big list of them, the Pluto return is probably the most powerful cycle that we're experiencing here in the US. The reason that, even though I know there are a number of you who are not in the US right now, the reason I'm focusing on the US is because, again, even if you look at those eclipses, when you look at all of these transits, it's not to keep reinforcing the idea that the US is more important than anyone else, because I think that there are a lot of problems with that. It's more to acknowledge that even as we see many of our systems collapsing, we still remain a nation that has an incredible influence on the entire globe and world around us. And I think that influence has a lot to do with our own state of consciousness and how it is that we stand for, and even how we vibrate with a particular frequency, or we live in a particular way, or we allow ourselves to awaken to what it is that we're really needing to see and pay attention to and change. So whatever the US does still has an incredible influence on, certainly on the rest of North America, and absolutely on the rest of the globe. So again, that's why I'm kind of focusing our awareness on this region and saying we here in the US have an opportunity to participate with these sacred cycles and to understand it's really our time to choose a new way and to be inspired to create a new story of who we are and what we can be. So with all of that, I'm not going to go into really great depth because I know it's like your eyes can roll in out of your head. I mean, this is a lot of detail about something you might not understand if you're not an astrologer, but it's just to say we have from 2020 lunar nodes on the axis of the US, ascendant, descendant. These are some very important points in the chart. Saturn is on the south node. That again is an incredibly important part. Jupiter's on the moon. And 2021 to 2022, there's a Neptune square Mars, and then Neptune opposite. So there are so many major cycles all happening at one time. And you can see they start at 2020, they complete in 2025. And then when you add the eclipses to that, then there's really kind of this window from 2016 just leading up to that eclipse through 2025, where the US and the Americas are really activated in an astrological, a larger cosmological sense. So again, this is an opportunity for us to affect some big change. Another way of looking at this shifting of the ages that we're in the midst of can be described, it was described by Sergio Magano. He's an incredible dream teacher who I highly recommend. And he has worked with these Toltec elders for many years. He was told by them at the completion of the Mayan long count calendar in 2012. You know, many of you will remember all of the prophecies around 2012, and many of you will know that there was a very real calendar, a very extensive calendar that the Mayans had produced that indicated that there was something big that was happening at the completion of 2012. What Sergio was told by his elders is that that calendar was incredibly important in describing a big period of transformation. And they would say still that there was a lot that opened up in 2012 for many of us. And so they said it was very important, but that there was a second long count calendar, a second calendar that described massive age change that the Toltecs themselves in ancient Mexico, that they carried, and that calendar described a period of time from 2012 to 2021 that was the threshold between from the ending of one cycle, a 6,600 year cycle, and the beginning of a new 6,600 year cycle. Now they refer to those ages as suns, and they would have referred to those ages as alternating between a day sun and a night sun. So every 6,600 years you shift from day to night, which I found to be really fascinating. I'd never heard that anywhere before. And so from this perspective, as elders said, you know, we're shifting. When we shift from a day sun to a night sun, part of what you need to understand about that is it means, again, we're shifting from a more yang, or you could say masculine age, to a more yin or feminine age, more centered on the earth. And he would say also the skill sets that's needed in the shift to the sixth sun, to a more of a night sun, are the skills of a dreamer, of someone who knows that their reality is very malleable. There's also a shift in the fifth sun, if it's more centered around the external or outer reality, whereas we're now shifting into an era that's more centered around the inner reality or inner mastery. And I think many of us, with everything that happened through COVID, have recognized that that is a massive shift for many of us, is more turning inward, more understanding the energy behind the form rather than being so oriented simply toward the form of things. So according to these elders, they would actually say that the lunar eclipse in May of 2021 last year was the shift into this new age. So here again, we have this window of time where it's like everything's happening and we feel it, right? I mean, so I'm describing there are all these prophecies and all these astrological frames through which we can just say it's happening, something bigger, a bigger transformational cycle is happening. And then of course there's the Eagle Condor prophecy that I talked about before, that that is something that many Indigenous peoples, and even if you follow the Pachamama Alliance, that's a really important organization that has brought greater awareness of Indigenous worldviews and perspectives and given back to Indigenous communities. They often tell that story and have used that as a strong new myth or story to help us understand that we live in an age where the mind and the heart are needing to reconnect. And also that the peoples of the South, the perspectives of the people in the South are really needed for us here in the North. And then finally, I want to just complete before I open it up to a little bit more of a conversation. I'll say that another very important thing that's happening right now is that we have the Venus and Capricorn cycle that began on January 12th of this year, and it completes August 20th. I should have written next year, 2023. And whatever cycle Venus is in, that sign is the one that's in the deepest death rebirth. It's in the portal also to be transformed. And so if we also consider that, and we also consider the transit I mentioned before with Pluto, the Pluto return for the US, the bigger cycle we're in, there's this an absolute necessity for us. Sometimes I refer to it as composting culture, or if we look at the culture around us here in the US, to really ask what's true, what is it in the way that we live our lives? What is it in the way that we have conducted ourselves and created a society together? What in that is healthy and true, and what is it that's needing to be composted? That's the question for all of us right now. And whatever we choose to do here, and again, has a tremendous impact on the rest of the globe. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to close this down now and and stop the share. So what my intent has been with this is to give the larger frame for why it is that this is not to be frightening to people. I think clearly we're already in a moment where we're living in we're living in the crucible, we're living in the cauldron, we're living in this moment where we know so much is shifting and changing and must. And so I do with Pluto cycles, also with the Venus descent cycle, often the most vivid description for how it is that we can understand how difficult it can be to live through this kind of process really is the idea of the butterfly and the chrysalis, the butterfly and the caterpillar and the chrysalis. And as a nation and as really a human species, I think that's precisely where we are. So the purpose for me in doing this, again, is to bring forward many speakers, many thinkers, and to bring us together in community to really dream into what it is that we can create together that looks and feels different. So I'm going to just stop there and just open it up to first to a Q&A, and we'll see what happens from there, because I might even create breakouts depending on how the energy feels. So, oh wow. Were you all able to see my images at some point? You could chat, put it in the chat. Because I'm seeing that Regina had written that she couldn't see my images. Oh, good. Okay. All right. Okay. So I just want to open it up right now to Q&A. Anybody, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourselves. Okay, great. If anyone has questions, anyone has comments about this. Maybe you might even say where you're tuning in from. And if you want to share a little bit about what brought you here and what inspires you about the image, about the idea of Turtle Island Reborn. Oh, good. Thanks, Faye. So just to bring yourselves into the circle, into the room, just to hear. So wonderful to know that Cheryl just came. Cheryl Angel, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Cheryl Angel is a wonderful wisdom keeper who knows quite a bit about visions and holding visions and carrying through with visions. So welcome, Cheryl.
I've got a question if it's time for that.
Absolutely.
I'm Tasha and I'm in Columbia, Missouri. And I just really appreciated what you were saying about that. You were saying about, like, was it Toltec, the calendar, where it's like, it's a nighttime sun? How did you say that again? And how do I find more information about that? Because like the need to be like more visionary or more like seeing in the dark kind of sounds like what we're coming into. That resonates so much, and I'd love to learn more.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha, so much for thanks for asking about that, because there are a lot of people who have spoken about the sixth sun who are very interested in prophecy, and this was one way of perceiving it that I had never read or heard of before. So it's Sergio Magano, his book. He wrote a book about that. And again, I can put that in the chat before we end. But he writes about, and I think it should be clear to say, it's not to say that, we always, obviously, that we're always going to be feeling like we're living in the dark. It's not so much about that as a more, again, like yin orientation, right? And that I found it intriguing too, in that way that, I think about how it's pretty clear that the culture over the last 5,000 years that has been somewhat dominant has been oriented towards, in many ways, towards the light, has been oriented towards lightness. And so to learn to become more intimate with the places of the unknown, of the darkness, that's part of how I was feeling that interpretation. But yes, that the art of the dreamer is what's needed. That in some ways, that's what really struck me about it too, is the malleable nature of reality. And I think many of us have felt that lately. Like we've felt the ways that from moment to moment, like my frequency, my way of feeling and being seems as if it has an immediate effect on the world around me. I mean, I think, anybody wants to share anything about that they've been having that experience. But so it's important not to take these things, obviously, like so literally that it's like, it's all dark now. I mean, it's not like that, but more of an honoring that we're moving into of this other pole of the unknown, it's a time of great mystery that we're moving into, and we're in a threshold as well, so that's part of what we might consider. It's a between time in many ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha.
So Tammy,
Yeah.
so is it like, when we go into winter, how, we tend to go inward and reflective, and is it like that?
Yeah, that's how I was feeling it. Thank you, Talon. I feel, again, like, this is one of many frames. And the reason I present them is so that we can kind of open our minds to different possibilities about this very strange time that we're in. Because I think there are many Indigenous perspectives that can support us in that. And of course, in this speaker series, part of my intent is to, I'm introducing an idea, but part of my intent is to bring in people each of whom have a very deep knowledge base around each of these areas, right? So we can go much more deeply into them. But yeah, I think that's a really powerful and a really accurate way to kind of describe that, that understanding. I mean, that resonates for me. And what I like about what you're saying is that it also just really feels like that's, it feels like there's been so much of an orientation around spring and summer, and that we love these things. And generally speaking, you don't hear people talk about how they love the winter, or they love to go inside. Now, even as I say that, I feel like what's been interesting to me as I create this and as we're talking about all this, you may feel this in the field as well. I almost feel like we're changing so rapidly right now, that it's almost like when a child goes through a growth spurt, if you're living with that child, you don't see it. But if you don't see that child for a little while, it's going to be so immediately apparent to you. And that's kind of how it feels to me in terms of, what I'm seeing in terms of the way many, like humanity itself, and so many people in the circles that I'm a part of, are just growing and evolving and maturing emotionally at such a massive pace. But yeah, I love what you're saying, Dylan, because I think
How long does it last?
It's a 6,600 year cycle.
600.
Right. So this is why I'm saying it's not like all of a sudden lights out, right? But
Right.
it's more of a tone. It's like there's a tonal shift. Just like we live in a realm of polarity and duality always. So there's always going to be both, but there's more of that emphasis, or the skill set that's needed is more feminine in nature. It's more yin in nature. And there are a lot of ways we've heard this, like the Dalai Lama saying that it's the women that are going to help, who need to be the leaders right now. Or there's this idea that the feminine in men and women needs to really rise up right now and be a strong leader. So it's another way to say that the poles are shifting and that the balance is shifting.
And you said it was 666 years?
6,600 years.
6,600.
So, and again, there are a lot of ways to look at the changing of an age and the great wheel of time, right? How that's divided. But one of the ways is that often when we look at Western civilization as the frame, because it has been so, it has permeated so many other cultures, colonized so many other cultures, that when you look at that, you might put that in a 5,000 year frame where we've shifted from a more feminine era to a more masculine era. So that 5,000 or 6,600 year marker is very common across cultures, that something big has been happening in that time frame. So, and one of the ways you can describe that in terms of astrology, and the way that there's a process called precession, where because of the tilt and wobble of the earth, and that there is this way that the backdrop of stars behind the equinox sun or the solstice sun at any given season, it's going to shift and change over time. And so 5,000 years ago, the bull constellation was behind the spring equinox sun. So it would have been the Taurus age, or it was a more matriarchal age. Think about in the Bible, the golden calf stories. There was 5,000 years ago, it was the age of Taurus, which is understood to have been much more peaceful, more matriarchal. And then it shifted into the age of Aries, where then the constellation of the ram was then in that position behind the equinox sun. And that shifted us into a more masculine era. So that was about 5,000 years ago that shift happened. And so that's another way to look at the shifting of an age, but that 5,000 year window is understood to be a time where some big shifts and changes have happened, and they're happening again. So there's that kind of perspective, or that view.
Tammy, I think also about, I'm sorry, I'm Susan.
Oh yeah, hi Susan.
I'm in Colombia. I think about alchemy and soul and Luna. The sun is this very direct light. It's a very light of consciousness. It's the,
Mhm.
it's all the, it's the Renaissance period. It's the bursting of the intellect and this conscious kind of light
Mhm.
versus this reflective light that comes in the nighttime that is much more associated with the feminine
Yeah.
in alchemy.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so powerful. Thank you for mentioning that. I really love that. The alchemical view is so important. And in fact, one of the speakers that I'm really hoping will participate is an astrologer who really tunes back into the original alchemists. Because, if you think about the deeper roots of European culture, the magical traditions of the alchemists, the hermeticists, is something you can look to kind of help us dive deeper than the layers that we're currently living in. And I just, there is that perspective that the feminine is, from when I look at a birth chart, when I think about things through elements, because you'll often look at the signs through elements, the way I was taught to understand that is that water and earth are both feminine, or yin. And the way to understand that is that they're about bringing spirit into matter. It's the involutionary path. It's the down and in kind of movement is yin or feminine, similar to what you're saying, Susan. And then it's more of the up and out journey. It's the path of ascension that is more masculine, more oriented towards consciousness. That's fire and air. So, so it would make sense that in the kind of bigger sweep of time that we would have these larger movements where there's, and it may feel, yeah, it's where we're shifting a bit from one to another, and it's somewhat bewildering to see and know how that feels. But we're in the midst of something, as we can feel, that's very big. It's in some ways feels encompassing. So thank you so much for adding that, Susan.
Tammy,
Yeah.
if I may,
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, you were speaking of different prophecies, and I've lately been immersing myself a lot in the Andean culture and seeing again and again references to Pachacuti. And Pachacuti is a reference to how literally it means the return of the past. And what it refers to is a concept of time that isn't so linear like our concept, that, there's the past and there's the future, and
Right.
there's this constant progress, to something better. And that was the original idea. But in this concept, there is no future without the past. The future and the past are inextricably linked, and they are in fact the same. And so we are returning to the time of the elders. We are returning to a time when the indigenous voices are the ones that carry some of the answers that we're looking for, because they still, many of them still are able to retain a pre-colonial way of looking at the world, a pre-industrial, Christian way of looking at the world. And I think it's going to be increasingly important to do the kinds of, inquiries that you're doing right now. I think this is so incredibly valuable, this project that you're launching tonight. And I'm so super excited, to be a part of it. I think, to the extent that we can seek out and listen to indigenous voices and these times, it will really help inform our progress, or our transition to a different kind of a future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. I love that. I've been reading about the Pachacuti kind of concept as well. I love that you bring that forward, because it's interesting. I work with the divine feminine for so long, and working with the Venus cycle, for those who followed that astrological work. And I have loved that so much. And yet what came through really clearly once I really seeped myself in it was that the nature of reality is that as soon as I started really focusing a lot on the feminine, then the masculine kind of came in my dreams and was showing me, you have to focus equally on me. So if I'm going to focus full on in this one direction, then immediately the other balance is going to want to come in. And so I realized even as I was creating this and this, as I was receiving the visions, and I was like, oh gosh, do I really want to do this? I've had a lot of resistance, but I've seen turtles so many times. I've had so many dreams. It's just like, no, you need to do this. You're like, and I'm just like, okay, I'm not even Indigenous. Like, this is awkward. But it's like, I do follow my visions. I try to follow my visions. And so it felt important. But yet I had this real strong realization, anytime we do something like this, part of it is what it does inside of us. And I was realizing the more I focus on Turtle Island Reborn, the more I focus on the wisdom of the Indigenous perspective, and even just to focus, when you see Turtle Island Reborn, it's all about the earth herself, because I think it's so clear, many of us are recognizing down to I almost don't have words for it, but I think so many of us through COVID and beyond have had these moments of profound realization that our connection to the earth, it is so primary. Like, I really feel like we're reweaving our consciousness into the earth's consciousness now. Like, I feel like so many of us are doing that, and it's a mysterious process. Like, she's calling us. But I realized that if I focus on Turtle Island Reborn and more of an Indigenous consciousness, which is more that Pachacuti, it's like looking in a sense at the past. The more I do that, then the more I'm also actually going to have to look at modern culture. Like, what does it actually look like right now? There's all these skyscrapers, and there's, there's the computer I'm on right now. It's like, we're going to have to look at exactly what's happening in modern culture, and how is it that the inner animist, the part of us that is deeply interwoven into the consciousness of the earth, how is it that that's playing out in our pop culture, for example? If I'm going to focus on Turtle Island Reborn and the deep, rich potential of the earth, I feel passionate about the earth herself flowering, and us caring for our watersheds and beginning to identify as belonging to a particular river or mountain or region or ecosystem. I feel that, to me, feels incredibly juicy and powerful. But if I just look at the earth itself and I leave out the modern human culture that's emerged with it, so I've been really curious to see what's going to emerge from this whole conversation. Is this making sense? If anyone wants to jump in, I'm like, at this stage, it's just, you're welcome to, again, share anything that comes up from the conversation.
I just wanted to say, Tammy, when you were speaking about that you're not Indigenous, and it felt a little weird. I like to think of all human beings as Indigenous. We're Indigenous to the earth.
Yeah.
And so we have to remember that when you're talking about our connection to the earth, and when we talk about, and I know it's important to recognize specific Indigenous people, but when we talk about Indigenous, I like to incorporate that to all human beings and not have that separation, because we really are all Indigenous to planet Earth.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
We remember that, then that's going to help us, have a relationship with it and want to take care of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Talon. I really appreciate that. It's so true. And so you're really bringing in what I think is so essential, which is that I like the way you just said it, because we're all Indigenous to the earth. And I think that's the most important, larger principle. And also I remember with an individual I'd worked with a long time ago, who was a mentor of mine. He was Lenape, Apache, and he taught me that in his tradition that we all had in our hearts a healthy grandmother and a healthy grandfather, who, when we were trying to make a decision, it's like we had these ancestors inside of our hearts, this really deeply rooted connection to the past, you could say, that would help us to have a really strong, clear, instinctual yes or no in the moment. And I think about that as kind of like the Indigenous that lives inside of us also, right? So there's that idea we're Indigenous to the earth, which I think is so vital and important right now. And also, I appreciate you saying that, because it reminds me that I do absolutely agree that we all have an aspect. One of the ways I like to look at it often is that this cultural frame that we're in right now is super thin. It's very small. Like humanity as a whole, it's about this much deeper, that we have literally been more interwoven into our immediate environment, and that we've been more animistic, more understanding that we are that the whole universe is conscious and alive. And the amount of time we've had where we actually think that we're separate is about this deep. Like some people would say that civilization is only 3 days deep. If you take a modern person and put them into a context where they're in the wilderness, or they're apart from their iPhone and from, their everyday reality, and they're on the land, it only takes that long for us to reconnect to something that's really essential in our original essence and in our connection to the earth and to the universe. And that always helps me, to consider that. But yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you, Taylor.
Hi, Tammy, it's Faye. I don't know if you can see
Hi,
me, but
Faye.
hi.
I'm so glad you're
I
here.
think what you were just saying about our connection to the earth, it feels like the pandemic, which is global, it's happening really all over the world.
Yeah.
It's this, it is a time for us to reconnect to that deeper part that you were just describing. And I think what I love about your work, Tammy, and what you're doing is that it feels very it feels really important, and it feels very integrated. It feels like you're integrating many things that are happening right now. And I just really love your work, and that's why I'm here tuning in.
Thanks,
Because I
Faye.
just resonate with what you're doing. And I feel like there's something about this pandemic, and I'm wondering whether there's ever been, I mean, I know that there's been pandemics, that have happened, but has there ever been one quite like this? And I often think, what is the purpose of this? And it feels very much like it is connecting us to our own bodies, our own mortality, and then in turn to the earth. I mean, because it's just anyhow. I was just wondering what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah. And I mean, and at this stage, this isn't really a Q&A. Like, I really want a conversation. So thank you so much, Faye.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate you bringing that in. I mean, it feels to me like that's what I've noticed too. I mean, and this is where I'm wordless sometimes because of how much is changing so fast. I mean, how many somatic practitioners did any of you know like 5 years ago? And now everything's somatic, and even trauma. Like, and I know that some of us here aren't crazy about that word. And yet at the same time, to me, it feels like we're acknowledging and recognizing and cultivating tools to heal what lives in the body on a level that we never have before. Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. And I love that you asked if there were pandemics like this before. I think it's a good question. And it also makes me recognize that part of what inspires me about the beautiful potential of a flowering of a sacred culture once again in the Americas, something in it. And I don't mean that it's just one monolith, but I think more something that's informed by the specific ecosystem or landform that we live on. It's partially animated, even if it's in ways we don't fully understand. I really do believe that. Like we create culture. I'll just say in Missouri, for example, it feels really clear to me in this region, there's so much water. It's so green. It's so alive. It's so vibrant. It's very watery. I feel like the culture that emerges here and that is emerging here now that people are slowing down more and becoming more present. Well, it's been like this for a while, but it's more visible to me. It really is about emotional maturity. It really is about this particular ecosystem, I think, is emerging within us a culture that is more capable of vulnerability and of emotional presence and of bonds, close community bonding, you know, and that kind of, I think, reflects the qualities of the earth herself. But I think when you're asking about the pandemic, or have there been any times like that before, I think about, that makes me think about ancient Greece, and also it makes me think about ancient Mayan cultures that coexisted at about the same time. Oh gosh, like 500 BC. I'm thinking around that time frame, where in these sacred cultures, you could have gone to a temple dedicated to Ixchel in Mayan territories, or you could have gone to a temple dedicated to Hygeia in ancient Greece, and you would have had priests, priestesses, you would have had people who were strongly trained and had cultivated the skills of, you know, as an oracle, or their intuitive skills would have been honed and developed. They would have known about the cycles of the planets, of the stars and the moon. They would have had the sacred sky medicine that they would have had woven. They would have worked with dreaming. They would have, you know, worked with plant medicine. They would have, some people would have had the specialization of following, you know, knowing how to track the meaning of the movement of birds in the sky. There were words for that. So I think, you know, that would have been true also on Cozumel, the island of the goddess Ixchel. They would have had, you know, their priestesses were trained in astrology, dreaming, womb wisdom, rites of passage. These are the kinds of things I'm talking about that, you know, that we have our own version of that in even now, but it feels like it's funny, because as I'm even speaking to it, I have to say I feel very excited in a lot of ways, because I do think that I see so many people around me in my world who are remembering how to dream again. They're remembering how to work with their dreams in really powerful ways. A lot of people are learning how to use the gifts of intuition, of the clairs, you know, like clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance. These are the kinds of teachers, these are the kinds of practices and tools that I'm going to be interviewing people to share, you know, more about. How is it that more of us can reawaken these kinds of innate gifts and skills that I think our ancestors really carried, and that have been kind of colonized out of us. Yeah, I'm going to just stop there and see who else wants to speak, because part of why I'm so excited to have time tonight is because I really want to hear from so many of you that are out there, but I don't get to see or hear from, because it's always one way. And you're all so brilliant. And this is such a powerful time to have conversations, because we're all going through so much profound change. So again, anybody wants to pop in and just really riff on anything we've talked about, or what's in your heart right now.
Hi, Tammy. It's Sherry over here in Colorado.
Hi, Sherry.
Good to see you. Yeah, I'd like you to say, riff on some things you heard. I think what you mentioned, I think about losing or not remembering our innate gifts, our dreaming. I'm realizing that especially with womb medicine, like I think of modern medicine, which is great for many ways, not knocking that, but like so much not understood about women. Like, oh, it's just hormones. What's your womb? You know, kind of passing it on. And we don't have this grandmother knowledge. We don't have this connection to the cycles, you know, and I think so much of that is dismissed. Like, we don't think of, I try to think of growing up, who I ever spoke to about my dreams other than, oh, I had a nightmare and it scared me. But dreaming was something that I got scolded for during class for daydreaming, right?
Wow.
Let alone,
right,
you know, studying our dreams at night. So I've been feeling this return myself the past couple years, and especially now, just working with my dreams, opening myself up to them, and kind of connecting with that innate wisdom of, okay, just because it can't be explained doesn't mean it's not real and that there isn't magic there. So yeah, it's an amazingly powerful time. It's like I can't even process all that's being downloaded, you know.
Right.
The big wave.
Totally. I hear you so much with that. Thank you. Wow. I love so much of what you're saying. I love that. Yeah, because what you're making me think of too is that, you know, considering that we're really in the heart of the Pluto return for the US right now, again, this kind of dark night of the soul, this moment of such, it's a deep descent. And so there's so much that is wordless. There's so much that's being remade on the inside in a mysterious way. But there is also grief. There is also heaviness. There's clearly, you know, we're in a moment where we feel that. It could be that I could have just as easily said, you know, what are we missing? And that might be a good question. You know, what do you feel like in terms of a sacred culture? What do you feel is missing in the world around us? And how is it that we can create our own version of that? You know, we can be informed by Indigenous ways, Indigenous wisdom, and we're going to have to create it in a modern context. So I'll say for me, one of the things that I see as glaringly missing is rites of passage for young men and young women. Like massively, I think if our young men actually had rites of passage, and I mean that meaning, you know, part of that is to even, and not just men and women, but for those who are non-binary, what would that look like? You know, I think our young people are really struggling right now. So yeah, what is it that we're missing? What do we want? What do we need? And what are we already beginning to create in the world around us that feels like sacred culture? And I will say, I think part of the reason I feel this is so important is because part of what's happening across the globe right now is what always happens in times of massive upheaval. And that is that many of the governments, including India and in other countries, are the populations and the governments are being overtaken by fascist and theocratic or religious fundamentalists, you know, because that's part of what can happen because people require a connection with the sacred in times like now. So again, that's almost like my question is what do those of us who may not fit into those clear religious boxes, how do we help to give birth to new ways of taking care of each other that really hold each other? Yes, that's a question I come to a lot.
I think that's a really good question. And how do we, for us, for those of us that have a relationship with the earth and have a relationship with this new way of thinking, how do we take over like the government? Like how do we, and when I say it, I said like a horrible way to phrase that, but how do we need to change, we need to get world leaders on board with our view of thinking and not make it about, you know, the gross national product or money or about profit or about, you know, or we always look at everything around the earth and we you know, that's a commodity, you know, we're always turning things into commodities or money or whatever. And how do we change how world leaders view the earth? How can we do that and successfully, and get people into politics that are willing to stand up for those beliefs and veer us away from what has been destroying, you know, the planet for so long?
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I always appreciate that you bring it down to that core. When you talk about sacred culture, I think you're getting at what I always feel too, which is that we've like you said, we've made everything a commodity. That's one of the major issues with the culture as it stands now. And so how do we shift that? How do we change? It's a pretty foundational way of changing. I think that's a question. And when you said take over governments, yeah, I mean, I think it's right. It sounds funny because we're like, and yet, I think that's a very viable question, because we are seeing our institutions falter and fail around us. And at every level, that is what Pluto is in Capricorn. Pluto is a planet that again has to do with the deepest dismantling process. And Capricorn is all about the institutions that we lean on, that we should be able to rely upon, that care for our communities, and that help us to function in a collective fashion. And they're failing us profoundly. We see this with every single institution. And so, yeah, I mean, the part of the reason I've been drawn to, and I will interview people who are bioregionalists who have brought forward that way of thinking about organizing, that way of thinking about who we are and to what we belong, is because they had the idea of really politically organizing based on bioregions. Like, I belong to this watershed, so I'm going to see myself, and that's really what I've been doing too, ever since I was inspired by that. We live in the Missouri River watershed, so you start to make that primary. You start to see that bigger than everything else. Understand that that is the source of life in your community, and then you can begin to imagine, well, how do I actively knit together the community that is relying on this water source and woven into that consciousness? But the bioregionalists would have seen themselves, they'd had the original idea to literally even have political bodies. They had bioregional congresses to create a kind of parallel form of government, so that when these structures now are falling, you have something else you can rely on that's actually strong and works, right? So yeah, it's a very important question.
I'd like to respond to that a little bit too, and
Yeah.
literally, because if you look at the case of what's happening right now in South America, it's quite a different thing than what we're seeing happening in North America and Asia, for example. Colombia, just 2 weeks ago, elected for the first time in their history a progressive president and a Black woman vice president. Francia Marquez is an ecofeminist who has won the Goldman Prize for her work on environmental activism and land defense. And she's brilliant. They're both just brilliant. And Petro is a former guerrilla fighter, not the FARC, but the M13, I think they're called, the ones that were really very profoundly, pro social justice. And if you listen to his discourse, he is very committed to the environment. If you look at what Chile has been through in the last, it started right before the pandemic, actually, the social estallido social, which literally means social explosion, where people were all over the country filling the streets and made the country absolutely ungovernable, forced the resignation of the president. Now they have one of the leaders of that student movement. It started as a student movement, and then it ended up becoming a movement of everybody. He is now the president, and they just passed a new constitution. The first time they have been able to change their constitution since the country was ruled by Pinochet, the fascist dictator. And they just passed that new constitution, which has lots of references to, they've enshrined the rights of nature, the rights of indigenous peoples. And that's also happening in Colombia, that indigenous peoples are having a huge place at the table. And it's just really exciting to see. Also in Bolivia, in Peru, really,
Condor.
And we're poised to have, Ecuador is a little more complicated, but we're poised to have a new leader in Brazil, which will be quite different from what we've been seeing there. So I think South America really gives us a lot of hope, and there's still a very, active discourse that has room for more diversity of thought that is really hard to break through with in the United States right now. I mean, we're starting to, and we have thank God now we have access to more alternative media and social media that lets us talk to each other about different things. But even so, you don't have the diversity of political discourse. Look what happened to Bernie Sanders, for example, you know? But those kinds of people are being elected throughout Latin America now. So it is theoretically possible, you know, that can still happen. And it has to happen at the political level because those are the people who are controlling the resources and the money. So it's nice that we can see examples where that's actually happening and that's working. And they're coming from the South, interestingly enough, from the global South.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great
no, it's-
news, Tracy.
Mm.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's interesting. I do think I have to think often that we have to begin by seeing what's working or what this is true for the individual. And I think it's also even true for a nation. What is a strength of a person? How can you strengthen and bolster that? And I have to say, and I'm not even imagining that everyone will agree with me with this, but I do tend to think that as distorted as our capitalist system is, that there is something about the entrepreneurial spirit, if it were expressed in a healthy way, that could be part of what the US could have as a healthy thread. I don't know. I mean, I've questioned this a lot. Is this making sense what I'm saying?
Hello.
Yeah. Who is this? Hi.
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 This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Yeah. I was listening to what everybody was saying, and I think it's really important for everyone here who's invested in change and who recognizes that there is a lot of wisdom and missing, and that there is a lot of need for alternative, an alternative lifestyle than what we've been through ourselves because we're colonized. And when Tracy talked about the politics of the Southwest, and just before that, another lady talked about watersheds and that there was a governance, some sort of political governance around that watershed. Those things, those two things that were mentioned, and also what you just said about, you know, the entrepreneurial spirit, those three things are all connected to the environment. They really are. Climate change, environment, and they're also this topic about sacred culture. In the culture of the Indigenous people, we don't separate our enterprise from our governance, and we don't separate it from our roles as individuals because they're interlocked and interdependent upon each other. So to be an everybody in a healthy community that knows the roles and that are accompanied by whether you're female or whether you're male or whether you're the mother or the father or the child or the uncle or whatever, all of those are connected as a whole. So it's really difficult for me to watch people talk about how separate they are and how they try to change one thing in one area when they're all connected and there's one not more important than the other. But I think it's comfortable for people who are colonized to separate things and take things apart rather than look at the whole picture. And I see that almost in every conference that I go to, that nobody looks at the whole of the issue and starts looking at solutions as a whole rather than as separate groups. So just how this group started, the conversation started, it naturally went to a part where we all wanted to be included. And so we talked about being indigenous to the tribe. I mean, not to the tribe, but to the earth. Because we all need to be part of the whole. And we don't need to say that we're indigenous. But people are saying that. They're finding in all of their discussions, when they talk about wisdom and when they talk about ancestors, when they talk about healing, when they're talking about ceremony, they want to throw the word indigenous in there. We're indigenous to something. And yes, we are all indigenous to the planet. But our responsibility as indigenous people to that planet is not equal. It's not equal. It hasn't been equal for 5,000 years. So to use that word to make everybody feel like they belong is a distraction for me anyway, because it's not the point of being indigenous. The point isn't being indigenous to the planet as to make us ourselves equal. What's important is that we recognize ourselves as a part of the whole, this whole planet. And I think we're ready to evolve to the next step without having to say that over and over again. I like the word watershed. I like the word governance. I like the words entrepreneurship. I love the word sacred culture. I love all of these things. But when you talk about, if we're gonna use indigenous as belonging to something rather than indigenous as connected to culture, then we've just lessened. I feel like we're diminishing the word indigenous by separating it again. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for sharing. And I so appreciate what you're saying. I think it makes a lot of sense to me. I suspect to many of us. And what I'm also left with and what you're saying is the way we separate things out. That's what I'm really curious about, is how it is that when we are so accustomed to doing that, I'm really curious about how it is that how we unlearn that, how we actually learn to not separate things. I think that's, yeah, what does this process look and feel like? How is that? So, but having your voice in this circle, and I think it's clear that the intent in saying we're global indigenous, which I think many of us really understand what the intent of that is. Recognizing that as an indigenous woman yourself, indigenous to a place and a culture, that's a very different thing. And I appreciated the word distraction, because I can see where even having this conversation, about Turtle Island and proposing this, and as you're saying, the desire to connect into indigenous wisdom, there are a lot of potential minefields in that. There's a lot. But I think what you're saying about seeing things connected and whole, and that is where it's at. So yeah, I sometimes don't know quite how to do that.
I whenever you're when all of the resources that you're accustomed to seeing healthy and abundant and available, when you see those resources diminished and unreachable, then you know what to do. But so our people, we know what to do. We know that we need to defend the land and we need to defend the water, because it's disappearing right at the land was pulled right out from under our feet, and the access to water was our access to clean water was threatened. So so we know what to do. But when those things, when you're not under threat of losing something, then you don't know what to do. It's that entire it's that threat that makes you respond. And so I think a lot of people want to do something, but nothing of theirs is under threat. And so they have to follow the people who are losing their land and their water and their resources and their rights and their like you said, that what you see missing is rites of passage. Well, that's endangered in my tribe too, because we're raised in an educational system that doesn't value that, where we live in a community that doesn't see that as important, where we have to do everything grassroots, away from the public, just to be who we are. We're not recognized in the system that exists right now. We don't hold any value, because it's based on how much money you make and what kind of house you live in, and you have to have a car to get around. And a lot of people I know don't even have a driver's license, much less have a car. So from my point of view, I can understand why people feel lost and they don't know what to do next. It's because they're not losing anything. They have resources. There's privilege that comes with just being born not native. Just having parents that work, being educated, being part of a system that's like a double-edged sword. On the one side, it makes people comfortable, and on the other side, that comfortableness comes at the cost of other people. But basically, it comes at the cost of the earth. The earth is the one that's paying the final cost for the comfortable lifestyle that the majority of the people live in the United States. That's why other countries are rising up before we are. In South America, the people are directly affected. They're the ones standing up because they're defending their lands and they're defending their watersheds. They have to, because no one else is. But here in America, it's different. Too many people are comfortable, and they don't see their watersheds being as the center of life when it's under a threat. I'm in the Black Hills, and last week the Forest Service granted a permit to a gold mine for exploratory, and I think there's over 200 drilling sites, and these sites are centered in what we call the heart of all that is, the heart of all that is, of everything that exists on Turtle Island. That's the heart, and they're going to be plunging core. They're going to be, what do they call it, core drilling in over 200 sites. It's like puncture wounds to the heart. So for us, we have to defend this watershed because it's the heart of everything that is. That's where the blood, the essential blood that sustains the whole balance on Turtle Island, that's where it's at. And people don't know that. I mean, I don't know if anybody in this group even knows that. When you talk about ancestral knowledge and ancestral wisdom, it's knowing the sacred areas in the landscape, and it's knowing when they're endangered, and it's feeling that pain even before the wound happens. That's, I don't know if that's what people want to learn about when they say, oh, we want to know about ancestral wisdom. It's not a glorified thing, it's a painful thing, because you have to see the wounds. You feel the wounds that are happening against this earth. People say that they want to get connected to the earth, but they don't realize that the earth is suffering and the earth is in pain. And ancestral wisdom is not this, this glorifying, this, I don't even know what people, people want to know what it is, but when you have it, it's, you're so connected that you feel the pain that the earth feels. That's what connected is. So whenever you start crying and whenever you start defending and when you feel the threat that the land feels and that the watersheds feel, then you're connected. It's not when you're enlightened and when you're going through this, I don't know, people want to be happy and they want to be at peace. And I want to be happy too, and I want to be at peace too. But our world is endangered right now. And I'm feeling the pain that's coming to the landscape of the heart of everything that is, because I'm connected here. And it's not just happening here, it's happening all over it's all happening all over the planet. And so, yeah, the people in South America are rising up because they have to. They have to. People here in America have to rise up too, but there's so many people who are comfortable with the system that we have that I don't know if they're going to rise up in time. That's my worry. And I apologize for the my message here, but it's clear. I don't have any doubt that the heart of everything is endangered, and it needs protection. And there isn't anybody going to do it except, who's going to stand up and protect this land, from these bore drillings, over 200 of them. It's going to be people like me who are connected, who have that wisdom to know what's really going on. And there's only a small amount of us. So yeah, I want more people to get connected. I want them to understand what ancestral wisdom is. Yeah. Because the earth needs to be protected, and it needs to be protected now.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cheryl. I really needed to hear your voice in the circle, and I'm so sorry to hear about what's happening.
I so apologize. This is probably not why you invited me.
No, it's exactly why we invited you, because I mean, we have been numb for so long. So, and it does, we've been numb, I think a lot of us, and I always feel I've always felt like when I spent time in Palestine and I would spend time with my friends and they would be watching the news every day about what was happening in Gaza. And I always felt, I was like, wow, your children are watching that every day, right? They're just so close to it. And why do you watch that every day? And he's like, because we have to know we're connected to it. And I always felt, it's like if more people, and I go back and forth, I don't understand this, but I had felt at certain points, if more people knew what was happening, if more people had that big of a heart connection to it, that a few people wouldn't have to carry it alone. And what you're saying is really hard because there's that question of how do we let go of our comfort to the degree that we can really feel what's happening.
Hello, Tammy. I'm Regina. I'm in California in Santa Monica. I'm so happy to be here. I want to say that I'm so happy we're having this group and that I'm here today. And I feel that I really honor what Cheryl just shared and what you've shared. And I feel like it's already happening because right now, just by being here, I'm learning through you, many of you who are sharing what's happening in your different communities and the different places. And that is a lot. That is something. And by having groups like this, circles like this, where we're sharing and we're sharing what's happening. It's a start. It's a beginning. And I honor that is happening right now. Because just like I'm feeling, oh my goodness, this is amazing. It's like, we need to do more of this. And I'm so happy to know more because I love the earth, but I love the green. I love hiking. I love, the trees. But, now what Cheryl is talking about, the suffering of the earth and the aquifers. And there's a lot of noise. Somebody, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm so thankful that I feel that this is the new way, communication, sharing, from the grassroots, from the rocks, from under the earth. This is the way to connect and to start again. We don't know. It's not coming from government. It's not coming from politicians. It's not going to come from there. It's coming from us being in the unknown here, trying to figure it out with our hearts open and learning and compassion and kindness and just opening. So thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. And Tammy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you for what you're saying. I think every voice here is really essential. And when I hear your voice, Regina, yeah, I appreciate so much, Regina. I agree. I think these conversations are what's needed. It's what I really am hungry to have. And I just feel, Cheryl, with what you're sharing, that it makes me, I've had women I've been gathering with to do a lot of work around the womb lately. And the dreams that came through in that circle were very powerful. And one woman was having many dreams of the earth, where the earth was showing her how lonely she was because no one was willing to feel the pain that she was feeling, that she was dying. And so there are a lot of women who are connecting through their dreams. This is why we have to remember our dreams. This is why we have to connect to our intuition, and why we have to be willing to experience within our own selves the pain, so we can even contact that anywhere else. I think a lot of us, we've been so colonized, we don't feel that inside of ourselves. So how can we feel it in the earth? Yeah, so thank you. Did you want to say anything, Taylor?
I appreciate what Cheryl was saying, and what you all were saying about, and I didn't mean to, Cheryl, I didn't mean to offend you if I misused the word when I said that we were all indigenous to the earth. I really do believe that, and I think I mentioned that I didn't mean to lessen, take away from indigenous people to their indigenous cultures and to their homelands. But I do want to point out that when we talk about, and this is a difficult thing, because what we're talking about right now is we're talking about connectedness. And when we start picking apart everything, and we take, like when I use the words like we're all indigenous, and I don't know how to get over, we all have to realize that we are all connected. And when we start making those separations, that's what we're doing. We are separating us from everyone. Like when we talk about, like here in America, I don't consider myself a patriot of the United States. I consider myself a patriot of the universe, not only the earth, but the universe, because it is all connected. It's not just about the earth, it's about the entire universe. It's an entire one entity that we are all a part of. We are like individual cells within a mass body consciousness. And so we have to start thinking like that and stop separating ourselves and saying, I'm white, I'm black, I'm brown, I'm yellow, I'm Mexican, I'm American, I'm Polish, we have to start, and I'm not saying that we don't take pride and we recognize all of those different factors and wonderful things that all of those different cultures and things bring into everything, but it's we have to remember that we are a whole thing. And if we can think of it like that, I think we're going to be able to work easier together to, you know, come up with a solution.
So, I just want to honor what you're saying, Talon, and I'm realizing, I've had a couple people directly, I'm realizing what time it is that we probably need to close. It's actually about 15. I just realized that before I asked Talon. So, yeah, so I really appreciate everyone being present. I really appreciate, I mean, I have to say, I think it is essential to understand that from the perspective of spirit and the more universal aspect of things, absolutely we're connected. And also in the circle, essential to recognize the uniqueness of the experience of certain groups and populations, including individuals like Cheryl. In the scenario, in the situation, many Indigenous individuals find themselves in their communities, in their cultural life ways. It's a very specific situation that needs to be honored and witnessed and perceived of, and it's very different than the kind of general perception that we might have. So what our lived experiences is important. And so yeah, so I really appreciate the perspectives of everybody in Talon, the need for that connection and unifying perception, because I think that does bring us all here. And so I just think it's a tricky territory that's part of what the conversation's about, is how do we honor our humanity as a whole, which is so essential and what connects us. It's so important from the heart. And also when I open this circle and I invite in the perception specifically of people who are living, who are Indigenous in a specific cultural context and community, that it's also to hear what that perspective is and to learn from that, you know, as well as the larger human connectedness. So yeah, so I just want to appreciate everybody for being courageous and sharing their perspectives and views, and thank you so much for coming. And I'm going to close with gratitude for the conversation and the courage it takes for everyone who shared, to share what you perceive in this, because that's what this is about, is the larger conversation. So
Can I ask a question? Can I just
Yeah.
ask? I would be really interested in having more information about what's going on. Cheryl, where you're at about the gold
Yeah.
mining. How can I learn more about that and
Yeah, that's a good question.
get connected in
Yeah.
some way? If you want to share with Tammy later or something, I would love to get more plugged into that. And thank you so much for sharing.
The Black Hills Clean Water Alliance is a coalition of non-Indigenous landowners, grassroots Indigenous leaders, community leaders, and third-party descendants of the 1851 and 1868 treaties. And anybody who wants to join, anybody coming from anywhere, we need the support. We're having a action tomorrow downtown in Rapid City, but you can go to, on Facebook, you can go to Black Hills Clean Water Alliance. That's where we put out the information about the mining permits.
Thank you, Cheryl. I will definitely, I'm going to be creating a group, and more people will gather. And so whatever information you want to share about that, we'll definitely post and keep everybody informed on it. Okay. Because I think it's
Thank
really,
you.
it's invisible. What you're doing is invisible to most people. And that is a big piece of why that this is important, I think. So
Thank you. We need support.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Thanks to all. And again, I will post something about that specifically, and sending lots of love to every beautiful soul here. All right.